Hello everyone, Plato here, and today we will be going over one of the best AP Technomancer builds you can make in Worldslayer that I like to call the Lethal Shaman. This build is great for solo, duos, trios, and even hard trials carries. It's the potential that Tech Shaman had in vanilla and is reached in the Worldslayer with the addition of all the new fancy things. This will be one of my 2 AP Technomancer builds, so stay tuned for the other version which I will upload soon enough. Huge shout out to the homies Dude with the Blunt and Deuce for all that teamwork into getting the most out of this build. I also wanted to mention that I will be streaming live every day over at twitch.tv/PlatoBear, so if you have any questions about Worldslayer and want to hang out or need trials carries, stop on by. With that out of the way, let's get started. First off, we will be starting with our skills. For this build, we'll be running Cold Snap, Blighted Turret, and Cryo Turret. No need to go in detail here as we'll explain the synergy of all of this as we get more into the guide. Let's move on to our class tree. We will be going the standard middle tree that the old vanilla Shaman build went and branching a little to the bottom. With thorough testing, this is the best version of the tree to run for the Lethal Shaman build. The first node we will be taking here is Anomalous Body, as it is required to move forward with the tree. Then we go to Gadgeteer so we can further reduce our Cryo Turret and Cold Snap cooldown. We're forced to take Anomalous Body to move on to the tree, so nothing special here. Then we're going to go up and take Exposing Toxic, as we will always be applying Vulnerable with our Cold Snap and turrets, more on this later in the Pax Tree section, and also taking Mark for Execution to receive an additional bonus to our vulnerable damage. Remember, vulnerable damage is 15%, and an additional 40% to that 15% now makes our vulnerable 21% more effective. Moving along, we will take Fracture for that additional 10% freeze damage. Yet another Anomalous Body needs to be taken to move on to the next nodes. Heading down, we're going to take Wipeout for that additional 20% damage to enemies when they are below 30% HP. Anomaly Fueled for an additional 10% anomaly power, and then Adrenalizing Antenna for a 30% anomaly power boost for 10 seconds when activating our Blighted Turret. The anomaly power is really great for increasing our turret damage and the 24/7 application of our Toxic Dot, more on this later in the Pax Tree section. Heading back up, we'll be taking the second Gadgeteer node to further decrease our cooldowns for Cryo Turret and Cold Snap. And another Anomalous Body, nothing more needs to be said here. We will then take Exposing Frost so we can utilize the stacking of the second Marked for Execution node. Please note that Exposing Frost and Exposing Toxic do not stack, but both Marked for Execution nodes do, making our vulnerability even more effective. Since we will also always be applying Freeze 24/7 on this build, this just gets even more value. The next node we will be taking is Freezing Tanks, which is better than the alternative and makes freeze last 20% longer on enemies. Then we move on to Suction Module as we are forced to take this node. Weapon Leech does nothing for this build. Our next node we will be taking is Armor Plates. Decent enough for a node that we are forced to take, I guess. Heading to the final 3 nodes, we will be taking Doctor of Medicine, as this increases all healing by 20% for you and your allies. Again, not a bad node for a node we're forced to take. The second and last node we'll be taking here is Fracture, as a whopping 30% damage to enemies afflicted by freeze is a no-brainer. And to finish off our class tree, we will be taking the final capstone, Overclocked. This provides us with a 40% anomaly power boost for 10 seconds anytime we use Cold Snap or throw our Cryo Turrets. Just like with Adrenalizing Antenna, this is going to work really well with our 24/7 Toxic and Freeze application. We also get an added benefit of a second life if for some reason we die with this build. Now that we've covered our base tree, let's take a look at those fancy new Pax Trees. We will be going top Desolator Tree and starting off with Initial Striker, which provides us with either a 15% firepower or anomaly power bonus, depending on which is higher. Now this node for our current build is not providing any value, as our firepower with the current gear that I have is higher than my anomaly power. This is partially due to the anomaly power average gear scaling not working past average gear level 59 for our early access copy. This should be fixed on the live version, more on this later though when we go over the gear. The next node and what makes any and all AP Techno builds so damn insane is Lethal Devices, which is the inspiration behind the name of the build. Anytime we use an ordnance or gadget skill, we inflict Toxic to enemies hit and deal additional 10% of anomaly power as damage if Toxic was refreshed. Remember earlier when we went over Exposing Toxic, Exposing Frost, the 24/7 application of Toxic and Freeze, as well as the AP bonus from Adrenalizing Antenna and Overclocked? This is what I was alluding to. Lethal Devices, baby! Oh, and let's not forget its amazing synergy with the upcoming last 2 Pax Tree nodes in Permanence and Dissection. For our third node, we will be taking Painkiller, as this will grant a 5% health regeneration bonus for 3 seconds, which stacks up to 2 times when we damage an enemy. This is a node we are forced to take, and this value will be lowered to 2% on the launch version. Great for firepower techno, if you know, but so-so for AP techno here. The second to last node we will be taking for this build on our Pax Tree is Permanence. Anytime we inflict Toxic, we have a 100% chance to inflict a random additional status. How often will we be applying Toxic? 24/7, thanks to none other than lethal devices. And for our last Pax Tree node, we will be taking Dissection. We deal an additional 10% more damage to enemies for every status inflicted on them. Please note that this value will be adjusted to 5% for the launch version. Even at 5%, this is bonkers, as any time we use Cold Snap or our turret hits an enemy, thanks to lethal devices, they will always be applying Toxic. Pretty insane how synergistic this tree is. We have lethal devices, Permanence, Dissection, hot stuff here. Heading along to our Ascension Points, we only need 50 points to get the most out of this build. The Ascension Points you will want to focus on will be anomaly damage first. This goes for any build in the game. Your first 10 points into your Ascension tree should always be anomaly damage. Why? It's the single best stat in the game. That's why. For the next 40, the order really doesn't matter here, as long as you go anomaly power, resistance pierce, status power, and more damage to elites. I personally would probably go something like status power, then anomaly power, then damage to elites, and then resistance pierce. After your first 50 points, just put it where you want depending on your preference. Okay, now for the moment you have all been waiting for, our gear. Before we get into the details of our gear, I did want to touch on anomaly power scaling not working past average gear level 59 in the early access branch, which again will be fixed for the live version you guys are playing now. I'm mentioning this again as this affects our initial Striker Pax node. Currently, we only have 145,000 anomaly power bonus at Apocalypse tier 37. If I recall correctly, this should be around 500,000 at average gear level 72, so when this is fixed on the launch version, our AP will be higher than our firepower and we will get that bonus from initial Striker, as long as you also have gear supplementing anomaly power via our armor pieces, making this build that much better. Don't stress out so much about that additional 15% anomaly power bonus, as this build is still blasting. Another pro tip is to hold off on upgrading your bonus firepower shards for the 2 pieces of gear in this build that require bonus firepower, as these attributes are locked onto the set. Spoiler alert, we're using Borealis. With that out of the way, let's start with our primary weapon, which will be our Funeral Pyre, with the mods Shadow Comet and Weakness Trap. As for Apocalypse mod, we got Ultimate Bone Shrapnel, which kinda blows for a shotgun, but it's the best one I've found so far. Ideally, we want either Weakness Trap or Claymore Torrent on the Apocalypse slot, so we can swap out the T2 mod on the Funeral Pyre for one we didn't get on the Apoc slot. Now I want everyone to pay attention here. Do not hold your gun trigger for this build. Tap, tap, tap your gun. Our guns do 0 weapon damage, and they are our tools to deal massive damage from the mods we have equipped. Remember that since we are using a shotgun, make sure to not aim down sights and to hip fire for maximum spread to take advantage of multi-procking your mods. Simple. We want to tap into taking advantage of as many multipliers to feed Dissection, as well as another mod we'll get to later that will provide more damage versus enemies that are inflicted with weakness. Do note that both Shadow Comet and Weakness Trap have low cooldowns, which is what we're looking for, as short cooldown mods help us with rotationing more damage per second. Not sure if that's actually a word. For our secondary weapon, we have the Diamo with T3 Storm Whip and T2 Storm Whip and Violent Rupture. This drop is pretty much a god roll version of the gun you want to use as your secondary. A Thunderbird works here as well, since it also drops with T3 Whip. If you don't have a god roll version, that's okay. Focus on having T3 Storm Whip and T2 Storm Whip on your secondary. Why? The damage on them is insane and the cooldowns are short to boot. As for Violent Rupture, from my testing, this one is the best in slot at the moment that I have found. The damage on it is also insane and has a 6 meter radius AoE, which is hot. However, it is currently bugged right now in our favor, as the cooldown is appearing to be 3 seconds versus 5 seconds. Don't tell PCF, or who knows, maybe they got this fixed in the live version already. You can also mess around with any other third mod here if you happen to have a god rolled secondary with T3 Whip and T2 Whip. For our pistols, we have another god roll, this time with Torment and Agony. It rolled with Moaning Winds as the Apocalypse slot, and it also comes with Clip Combustion, which now has a higher cooldown but also increased damage. Then all we do is add Radiation Splash to the pistols to make it our one and only reload gun. Make sure you empty your pistols before each expo or trial so you can just swap to it and instantly get the reload mod activation. If you don't have a God rolled version, please prioritize Moaning Winds and Radiation Splash. Transitioning to our armor pieces, the stats you want to prioritize for our non-set pieces are going to be Anomaly Power and Status Power. For our helmet, we have the Techmonger Mask. It comes with the turret mod we need in Double Trouble and also has Anomaly Power, cooldown reduction, and Status Power, which are all amazing for our build. You actually don't need a purple God rolled, as those are really hard to get with the right Apocalypse mod, as the Techmonger as well as the Veil of the Flame Leper are great alternatives depending on the Apocalypse mod that drops, so keep that in mind. Please note that cooldown has a global cap at 50%, which you will reach with 2 pieces of gear with cooldown at Apocalypse tier 40. When you max out the shards at Apocalypse tier 40, your cooldown value will be at 25%. Please note that any additional cooldown past 50% is wasted. However, you can go past the global cooldown with class tree nodes and mods that specify cooldown for set skills, for example, like the Gadgeteer node we took in our class tree. This means for a truly min-max build, you can focus on other stats. Focusing on the mods we're using on the headpiece, we have Double Trouble, one of the new turret mods, and it's so hecking good. This is the mod that makes our turrets look like tanks as it deploys an enhanced turret with 2 barrels instead of 1, doubling the fire output. For our Apocalypse version, we got the Twins mod, which is great as this allows us to drop 2 turrets. For the mod we added on this headpiece, we have Long Winter, giving us a 66% increased range to our Cold Snap, which is amazing as this means more dot damage to the enemies thanks to lethal devices, permanence, and dissection. For our chest piece, we have the Robe of the Borealis Monarch. That's right, an FP set for an AP build. Who would have thought? The increased 60% damage to frozen enemy makes this best in slot. Note that Borealis got a slight nerf from 90% to 60%, it's still cracked. Remember that we are always applying freeze to enemies 24/7 with our Cold Snap, which is capped at 7.1 seconds for its max cooldown. So every 7.1 seconds, we are just spamming Cold Snap over and over again. This is also what makes our weapon damage mods we discussed earlier do so much damage. Remember, weapon mod damage increases via our level, but also via anomaly damage, not to be confused with anomaly power. However, the Borealis set bonus also increases our weapon mod damage as it will be receiving an additional 60% damage with those weapon mods on enemies that are afflicted with freeze. The damage bonus also applies to your teammates. Do note that Borealis stacking has finally been fixed. Focusing on the mods on our Borealis chest piece, we have another God roll piece here as Captain Hunter rolled on the Apoc slot is hot. 25% damage to elites is amazing, and this mod should be 100% used on every single build. We keep Icicle Storm here as this is our main AoE. We snap, we kill, Storm pops, and we watch things die, and oh so satisfying that Icicle Storm sound effect. Gets me every time. We added Euthanizer here as 25% damage to Toxic is a no-brainer for obvious reasons. Multipliers have always been hot, and that does not change with Worldslayer. Moving on to our pants, we have the Waistcloth of the Borealis Monarch. This is set piece 2 out of the 3. The mods we have here are Power Assimilation, Freezing Boost, and Improved Coolant on our Apoc slot. This is another turret mod that we definitely want. Regarding Power Assimilation, this is our flex spot for now as I keep messing around with different mods here to see what I like. Sometimes I run Danger Close, sometimes I run Anomaly Echo. Right now I was testing Power Assimilation, so that's why that mod is here. It's a no-brainer why we keep Freezing Boost, and Improved Coolant providing double the fire rate for our Cryo Turret really encapsulates turrets go brrr. For our gloves, and to finish our 3-piece set bonus, we have the Gloves of the Borealis Monarch. The cooldown reduction we get here is nice as it allows us to hit that global 50% cooldown cap. The mods we are running on our gloves are Shatter, which needs no explanation, Radical Therapy on our Apocalypse mod slot, which also does not need any explanation, and Trample the Weak. Remember earlier how I said we wanted to tap onto more multipliers and that's why we ran Weakness Trap on our Funeral Pyre? Trample the Weak is another multiplier we can abuse to do even more burst damage on our enemies. 20% more damage to enemies afflicted by weakness. Nice. We have truly ascended from Outriders to Multi-Riders, by the way. For our last piece of gear, I am currently running the Techmonger footgear as I have not found purple boots with anomaly power and status power, so this'll do for now. The Apocalypse mod on these boots are Cold Purification, which isn't amazing, but it's better than nothing. The two mods we are running here are V Compound, which deals 15% more damage to elites afflicted by Toxic or Blightfire. This number will be adjusted to 10% on launch. Afflicted elites explode when killed, dealing X damage and spreading the status onto other enemies within a 5-meter radius. We like this mod here as we basically have Captain Hunter Light and feeds into our Toxic synergy. The second mod here we have is Hail Shot, which increases our turret damage based on our status power. This is why status power is so important on our build, as this means our turrets really go brrr. Alright, to recap for this build, for those that are looking for this build but don't quite have all the Apocalypse mods needed, here's what you should focus on. For your Funeral Pyre, focus on Shadow Comet and Claymore Torrent. Don't worry about Weakness Trap unless you can fit Trample in the build. For our secondary gun, focus on T3 and T2 Storm Whip, and for our pistols, focus on Moaning Winds and Radiation Splash. For our gear, focus on these mods and add the other mods mentioned when you do get the proper Apocalypse gear. These mods are Double Trouble, Twins, Icicle Storm, Euthanizer, Freezing Boost, Improved Coolant, Shatter, Radical Therapy, Hail Shot, and Captain Hunter. If you want more value out of Cold Snap, feel free to add in Long Winter and either swap out Radical Therapy or Captain Hunter. What about some tricks and tips then? Well, like I mentioned earlier, make sure you don't hold the trigger on your weapons. Remember, our damage from our weapons comes from the mods, not the gun itself. Since we get the most of our damage when things are frozen, make sure you abuse Cold Snap to always apply a reliable freeze. Turret AI can get wonky, so Cold Snap is our savior here. With its low cooldown reduction, anytime you see an elite or group of enemies, feel free to Cold Snap and watch as you one-tap that motherfucker. Do not neglect your pistols. As much as you may not like it or are not used to it, it's a huge chunk of your damage, so start practicing. Since we're only using reload mods here, make sure to empty your clip prior to a trial or expedition. Keep your damage uptime by always throwing your blighted turret to take advantage of adrenalizing antenna, as well as using Cold Snap for the overclocked bonus as well. Do not spam your cryo turrets every time it's on cooldown. You'll be losing damage as it takes time for the turret to retarget an enemy. Instead, throw your turrets to reposition them to target enemies closer to you and or elites. And lastly, make sure you're keeping up with your weapon rotations. This can take some time to master, but once you do, you'll be flying. I hope you guys enjoyed something new on my channel that isn't all firepower pew pew. To be honest, this is the most fun I've had playing Outriders in a long time, and I'm really enjoying this build. Stay tuned for the other AP Technomancer build guide that I will be uploading soon enough. This second AP build has gone through many iterations, even one focused on using blighted rounds, but that one was much better for cheesing bosses. The version I will be showcasing soon doesn't require using blighted rounds and performs even better than its predecessor. A true brain-dead build that I worked on with the homie dude with the blunt. That being said, also stay tuned for my Firepower Technomancer build, which I will most likely whip out next so I can have one AP and one FP build up first. Sorry for those that wanted a second AP build, you'll have to wait a bit longer or catch me on my stream to get a sneak peek of it. You can always catch me at twitch.tv/PlatoBear, by the way. As always, thanks everyone for tuning in, and if you made it this far, I appreciate you. Feel free to check out my other Worldslayer videos that should be popping up anytime now. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and also hit that notification bell if you want. Until the next one, peace.